When the bell of Scone tolls, the law of the land has been made. We are here today at Scone Palace, the historic crowning place of Scottish kings for over a millennium. Who knows, time immemorial. Since time immemorial. And we are joined by the current custodian of Scone, William Lord Stormont, whose family, the Earls of Mansfield, have been here for about 400 years.
400 years, yeah.
And so, William, can you just tell us, before we sort of launch in, that quote obviously referred to Scone being the place where the laws of the land were made. Tell us a bit about the history of Scone, going back to sort of pre-medieval, and can you just tell us in sort of a nutshell how you ended up here managing this house today and the journey from there to now?
Of course. I'm very happy to be here to start with. You nailed it. The crowning place of Scottish kings. You nailed the pronunciation as well. Scone, not Scone or Scone, Scone. So it's where the kings of Scots were crowned in both a potentially pagan Pictish ceremony and then more Christian element more recently. First place of a recorded parliament in Scottish history as well, in the year 910. So a lot of history here happened before my family arrived. We arrived 400 years ago, 425 or so years ago. So my sons now, as of 10 weeks ago, represent, thank you very much, represent the 17th generation of the Murrays of Scone. So we're not doing too badly. And yes, I am now the steward, the custodian of Scone, having taken on that mantle from my parents recently, although they are still very involved, in particular my mother. A real force of nature. We wouldn't be here without my mother. Fortunately, from my experience, succession was, although it's a big hurdle, it went relatively smoothly actually, and I'm very honoured and blessed to now, and the way I coin it is, have been given responsibility for the engine of the vehicle of Scone, but also being given the keys to it. All too often, the two are dislocated.
Yeah.
So it means there's a lot of responsibility on my shoulders.
Yeah, the hardest thing.
I'm now in the driving seat and able to maneuver us into the future.
It's true. I think it in so many things, not just country houses, being, my mother is head mistress of a prep school, had this, when you have the responsibility but not the power, it's the hardest place to be, and actually you need both. And that's wonderful. So you moved up here from London a couple of years ago.
Yep.
Complete change scene. Can you tell our listeners where are we in Scotland?
We are in the heart of Scotland. So the city of Perth is just across the River Tay here, the former capital of Scotland. If you were to get in a car from Edinburgh and drive for an hour directly north, you hit Perth. You can see out the other window we've got a Highlander sitting over here. You can see the foothills of the Highlands are just here as well. So we're in that wonderful bit of Scotland for me, where you're within half an hour's drive of civilization, and a half an hour's drive of the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Well, I object to that definition. I think middle of nowhere is a bit harsh. Beautiful countryside,
full of barbarian phrases.
Aggressive invasion. Well, actually, it's quite. We're actually very pleased with ourselves, listeners, because Geoff and I came up this morning, and for once in the history of British travel, nothing went wrong. We're actually here on time.
It's extraordinary.
You flew and I got the train.
But I'm going back to London tonight, so I've come all the way up to Scotland for the day.
Okay,
whereas Rory's heading further up.
You jinxed it.
To North
You have to say that.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's really interesting because we're here partly because of the fact that we are preparing for the upcoming Historic Houses Association Collections Award, for which you at Scone are a shortlisted candidate. And we will talk about your collection here later. It's interesting for our listeners and viewers. The Collections Award is quite interesting. It's sponsored by Druitt's, the auction house. And houses can choose either to put forward their entire collection or a specific collection within the house. So it's quite hard as judges to judge when you've got an entire collection like Scone's and then comparing it to a collection of chinoiserie snuff boxes or something at another house. It's quite hard to pair up. But you have got an extraordinary collection. We will talk about that because actually this is, I suppose, the last of the Murray houses still in the family, so to speak, of the great houses that you once had. So Kenwood House, which we've done some reels from in the past, which is a wonderful Robert Adam house just outside
beautiful
London,
house.
on the edge of, well, it's in London, I suppose. Was of course your London house, sort of.
Yeah, would have been my London pad, just rubbing the salt in the wound there.
but we have work. That mirror behind us would have been made for Kenwood once.
Yes, it was. Yeah, and it's in the Robert Adam books. You can see it clearly.
So there's a lot of interesting history, and as with all country houses, there's so many different bits from different times. Can we just talk about the architectural evolution before we sort of crack on with the interiors? And so outside, let's start with the mount, the Moot.
The Moot, yes, the Moot Hill.
On which the Stone of Scone historically sat.
Yep.
Can you tell us a bit about that, and then the abbey that grew up around it, and then the dissolution?
Of course. Well, actually, as we were discussing earlier, what does Scone mean? Where did the name come from? It might come from the fact that there is this little inauspicious mound out the front, which is called the Moot Hill. So it was the site of the inaugurations rather than coronations of Scottish kings. The kings of Scots is how we refer to it up here. That was where the more pagan element took place, and where relics like the Stone of Scone, the coronation stone, most recently seen under Charles III's bottom, played a central part and crucial part. So crucial that obviously Edward I, the bad guy in Braveheart, took it out of our hands in 1295.
Yes, can we? I mean, for listeners who perhaps aren't familiar with this slightly strange concept,
yes.
What is the Stone of Scone, and why is it important?
Yeah, that we could do an entire podcast, and I have done an entire podcast purely on that. So where to begin? It is the coronation stone, now used in British ceremonies.
Yeah. It's literally a slab of stone.
Literally a slab of pink red sandstone mined in the local area to here. That slightly ruins much of the myth and legend around it, because the myth and legend is that it was Jacob's pillow, so from the Holy Lands, and brought to Scotland by Queen Scota, an Egyptian, a daughter of Pharaoh. And
God, this is great.
Great storytellers. But likely apocryphal, and essentially a narrative that was put to the stone by the Scots in essentially a quest to build a narrative around Scottish nationhood, in opposition to the English claims, and that all went to the Pope, talking about 13th century history. Very interesting stuff for some.
So it was a symbol of Scottish sovereignty.
Yes,
and it came from here. Sadly or happily, depending on how you look at it.
But it was kind of the intentional creation of a national identity in some ways. A bit like when we had Rory's friend Dr. Ralph Wade on talking about the Scots Baronial, again how they created Scots Baronial as a romantic vision of how that they wanted to portray Scotland to be.
So essentially, all monarchies throughout Europe, from the beginning of time, but in particular in the 12th, 13th centuries, were trying to add layers of legitimacy to their claims. And that was done in all sorts of different ways. It was done in purely religious ways, anointing, crowning, and using special oil from Jerusalem, whatever it was. And then often through the creation of these relics that gave great legitimacy to a dynasty.
Jesus' knuckle.
Yes, exactly that. So we went for, in Scotland, Jacob's pillow. The kings of England got a little bit jealous, and so decided that they wanted to have Jacob's pillow. And given it was such an item of national importance in Scotland, after pinching it from here, the English monarchs then built their own coronation chair around to house the Scottish coronation stone, which I think is really interesting. So the stone came first, not the chair, which we all now still recognise is still used today.
So we should have our king is the king of Scotland and England rather than the other way around.
Yes, exactly that. Exactly that.
And wasn't it nicked, the Stone of Scone?
It was nicked again in the 1950s.
It was nicked back. You mean?
But I thought it was nicked by someone and then got found.
It was nicked. It was nicked about 50 years ago,
but it was nicked in the first place.
Yeah,
it was nicked back.
by Scots.
No, you're right. No, it was Ian Hamilton and crowd, a bunch of 4 or 5 Scottish students nicked it back from Westminster Abbey in pretty hysterical and amateurish style, but pretty stylish.
I think they broke it en route, didn't
they? They did. It is bloody heavy.
That is fantastic.
No, and the other story I like about that is that the heist was, it didn't have much protection in Westminster Abbey, which is where they pinched it from. And two of the people who were in the getaway vehicle, the warden of Westminster Abbey was coming up and thinking, why are they here? So the way they got rid of him was by macking out massively. And it was the 1950s. He was like, "Oh, that's a bit awkward. I'll wander away," and that got him to piss off, which then allowed the other two to drag out the then broken bits.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, we actually, well, I think I've never put this past my father too much, but I think my great grandfather sponsored that.
He sponsored the
theft. We have a telegram in our possession.
It should be here. You never gave it to the nation. It was stolen.
So without getting too political, my great grandfather was a big believer in what he called home rule. It was known home rule, essentially devolution as we see it today. So although he was loyal to the UK and to the Queen, I think he believed in devolution of powers back to Scotland and to the other regions. So he I think sponsored it. Because the telegram we have is just, it's dated to several days after the theft, and it mentions a stone, and it's just like, and it's from the Friends of Scotland. It's like,
were they going to return it here?
Who knows? I did actually ask Ian Hamilton that once when I spoke to him,
really?
The great man, which was really fun for me. He was a real whippersnapper.
So we've got this extraordinary stone that goes back, I suppose, the current stone at least 800 years, on which all the Scottish kings were crowned, and now the English and Scottish kings are crowned. That was originally pagan ceremonies on the stone, and then they built an abbey next to that, Moot Hill, for the religious, for the Christian side of the coronations.
Like a lot of very early Christian sites, they tended to move in on sites of importance already. So, to me, annoyingly, there's no clear-cut evidence on this thus far, although we're hoping it will emerge. The Moot Hill, the site upon the little hill upon which all these ceremonies happened, probably is Pictish.
Okay.
And that was used for it's called the Hill of Credulity, the Hill of Belief. The Christian faith, it was originally the Culdees, they were called, a very early Irish Catholic tradition. They moved in here, had some sort of community here, which was then formalized under David I of Scotland in 1114.
Okay.
When a monastery's existence was confirmed here.
Okay.
50 years later, the monastery was upgraded to being an abbey. And this is why I always like to talk about, when you have an abbey, who runs the abbey, the abbot. So why is Scone called Scone Palace? It's because it was an abbot's palace.
Okay.
Rather than us, you probably think we're frightfully grand, the Marys of Scone.
I did, yes.
Well, we have talked about this bit on the podcast when we've done Blenheim, because we mentioned in the past that Blenheim is the only non-royal, non-ecclesiastical palace in Britain.
That is interesting.
Which means...
But hang on, why then?
There are palaces like Beaulieu Palace, which is built as a house, but on the site of a former abbey palace.
Yeah.
So, but, or even Dalkeith Palace, they all have ecclesiastical roots or royal roots, except Blenheim, which had neither, but was built.
And we kind of have both.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
But that presumably is why you're allowed to keep the palace name, because one doesn't... Lots of former places that were abbots' palaces don't still have the palace after.
No, but I think that's a good question. And then very controversially, this guy bought Apthorpe House in Northamptonshire and rebranded it Apthorpe Palace a few years ago, which has put a lot of noses out of joint in the country house world. Yeah. It's funny how people get proper NIMBYs. But we have these exactly. I mean, I'm such an anorak if I get annoyed by that, honestly. So this abbey is then here up until the dissolution of the monasteries.
Yes.
So we talked about that before, because we've done quite a few country houses, which were previously monasteries or abbeys. The abbey is practically swept away and over time declines. And at what point does it become a private house?
Essentially, the abbot, bishop, commendator, he had various titles at the time, was the reason for the Scottish Reformation. So he was a rather naughty bishop. But hence John Knox.
Oh, and the Puritans
John Knox himself.
The Puritans, like John Knox, didn't like that.
Yeah, did not like that.
No.
So John Knox himself and essentially a bunch of angry Dundonians came along the road. Apparently, John tried to stop them. But significant damage was done. And as you said, the building lingered on, sort of vaguely functioned, but was essentially condemned several decades later.
So that was a serious own goal.
The Puritans, the Puritans wouldn't approve of of Catholics who practice drunkenness and debauchery, would they?
No, don't look at me. I am a very well
behaved. so then
you should be careful. You're outnumbered unless you're Catholic. I'm also Catholic.
I'm Puritan.
Yeah, be careful.
Sweet innocent.
So then we see the house. Well, then it becomes a house. Tell us what happened and how did it come to the possession of the Murray family and then what happened after that.
So initially it passed into the hands as a secular lordship to the Ruthven clan, who were the Earls of Gowrie, and an incredibly powerful family. They essentially had 5 or 6, even 7 houses like Scone. They'd also done a few slightly debatable things in the decades leading up to this, where they kidnapped James VI of Scotland, James I of England eventually, several times in his youth.
Why
James,
did they kidnap him?
because there was a lot of squabbling in Scotland around who was really in charge, and the best way to be in charge was to hold the king in your dungeon. Really, that kind of helped. So obviously James maybe held a grudge.
And then when he became James VI of Scotland.
So and when he eventually managed to escape captivity and really gain control of his kingdom, or increasing control of his kingdom, a certain Robert Cecil, Elizabeth I's henchman, that's probably upset someone saying that, but he obviously, everyone knew the writing was on the wall in terms of Elizabeth not having children. James was going to become King of England, but I think it was thought that he needed to prove himself more. So Robert sent him a letter, which is, I believe, still available to see, saying essentially, look, Jimmy, you're not going to become King of England unless you can prove you're a decent king. And that was in 1595. And so essentially in the years after that, before King James became King James I of England as well, a lot of rather nasty things happened in Scotland.
He asserted his authority.
Yes. And the Gowries were there are obviously definitely 2 sides to this story. The king's story, the official and true story, is very different. But it's probable that this is very Scottish. And I'm sure the Frasers did something similar. If not, I'll be feeling very guilty. But essentially, the Gowries were moved on, to put it politely, and a number of families in the local area benefited.
Including the Murrays.
Including the Murrays. So the Gowries owned Scone, the Gowries were moved on. The Murrays, who probably coordinated the entire show, and moved in on Scone.
Okay, so the Murrays
you best behave, boys. We're dangerous. We're bad and dangerous.
Actually, I was going to say that I'm a descendant of James's, so you're welcome. You're very welcome.
What year is this now? 15.
This is 1600.
This is 1600. Okay.
The Gowrie conspiracy was an event that took place in Perth. That was in 1600.
Okay, so that's what it was in 1600 that that Scone became the Murrays.
Yeah.
And what was the house like when they arrived?
The house was a very nice, sort of very traditional, sort of standard for the era Scottish baronial manor. Often they were sort of in an L shape or a sort of U shape. That was
sort of 2 U shapes stuck together, wasn't it?
Yes, so it was built upon, or the merging of elements or buildings of the abbey, the abbot's palace, that had emerged from the wreckage. Fortunately, not too much damage was done to it. So it was really, the focus was on the abbey during the Reformation.
Okay. And then can you now? That's really interesting. I suppose I know that changed significantly in the 19th century when basically it was rebuilt to look like the palace we're in now. What was sort of a whistle-stop guide of how the Murrays went from being a cadet branch of a Scottish family to being the Earls of Mansfield? What did the first Earl do that got them the peerage? And then when was the house rebuilt?
And I suppose that a good question, because that then also leads me to speak of, obviously, the fortunes of the family is also the fortunes of the house. So the house and the first Lord Scone, first Viscount Stormont, David Murray, who was best mate of James I, he sunk a lot of his fortune into making Scone what was a very smart house in Scotland at the time.
So the first Murray who lived here was still given a peerage, but not an Earl who was given a...
Yeah, so he was a Mr. Murray, and he became Lord Scone, and then later Viscount Stormont. So we were ennobled at that point.
Okay.
And sorry, remind me why he was a pal of the king's. What did he do right?
He was a pal of the king's because essentially the Murray clan, who we were a cadet branch of, but we were very close to the family, the heads of the clan, they became the heads of the clan. Complicated Murray history. They essentially monopolised the Stuart court in Scotland.
Okay.
So, well, you know, all this from those weird positions like the groom of the bedstool and the chief potty sitter or whatever it is. They were all Murrays, or our kind of affiliates.
So you were kind of seasoned arse wipers, basically.
Yeah, very, yeah, still are. No. So, and that worked very well for us for a bit, and we were very loyal people.
Very well to have in a race.
Yeah, it is. We very loyal people, and obviously it worked very well because our mates who became the Kings of Scots then got another upgrade. They became the Kings of England as well. So for us, it's happy days.
Yeah.
There's lots of evidence of the English nobility being really pissed off at all these Scots coming into town, and then we were there going, this is fantastic. Obviously, then Charles I came along, and that's when there was the first of a series of speed bumps that our family careered into. So obviously you had the English Civil War, the Bishops' Wars as we would know it. We were very loyal to the Stuarts. Indeed, the General Montrose, General Graham, was our first cousin, and he did weave magic against the parliamentarian forces. There was a fantastic general. Didn't end so well for him. Didn't end so well for Charles I. Cromwell came along, and the first of a series of very significant fines were imposed upon us. Fast forward, Charles II came back, in having been crowned here, and his Scottish
Was he
coronation.
the last king to be crowned here?
Last king to be crowned here. Up in the Jacobites tried, but didn't quite blow off. And so that was happy days. The Stuarts are back in town, but then Glorious Revolution, it all goes wrong again. And we obviously were still true to the Stuarts. So we backed them when we backed the Jacobites, the second of this list of fines.
Okay.
Keep going, 1715, big Jacobite rebellion. We were very active on the battlefield. Again, it doesn't go well, and another massive fine. We kind of begun to get the message at this point, but some members of the family were very diehard and stuck in there. And so 1745 came along, the last major Jacobite rebellion, and again, another massive fine came our way. It's at that point when the Palace of Scone was unlivable.
Okay.
So it still looked like it had in 1600. That hadn't changed much. The roof had caved in. Indeed, there was very little inside. We had sold everything in order to pay these fines, apart from one or two of our most prized possessions.
Which include?
Which include the Mary Queen of Scots tapestries, the bed hangings, and indeed a bit of jewellery, which we hung onto, which was given to us by her, which is not on public display.
Yeah.
And actually a table in the same room, which was given to us by James VI.
Okay.
But there was a rather handy German tourist, a lady who toured around Scotland and said that she was incredibly interested to come to the historic Scone, but that the house was a bit beaten up and there was nothing to see inside. And, well, that's literally what she wrote.
Wow.
It was
Germans, the Hanoverians, then arrived.
The Hanoverians, had arrived at this point.
Yeah, and then at what point did your family sort of wake up to the idea that you couldn't keep paying these fines?
Well, so that was what I was.
This last Jacobite rebellion was the last.
Yeah, so some members of the family had begun to. There was a bit of a schism in the family, although it seemed to be relatively amicable. It's intriguing because at one point we were in both camps massively.
Okay.
I mentioned earlier that at one point one member of the family was tutor to the future George III, at the same time as his older brother was tutor to the future Jacobite king, Bonnie Prince Charlie.
Interesting.
An incredible Game of Thrones kind of situation.
That is extraordinary, yeah.
Well, it was basically the sort of more or less the Brexit of the 18th century, I think.
No, that's a good way to put it.
That's
a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But essentially, we needed a saviour.
Yeah.
And we were fortunate that we got two. We got a double dose. So the generation that were born in kind of 1700 to 1720, and the big generation, 14 children. And that is a record that I mentioned to my wife Charlotte, but no luck there. We got two. We're doing all right. And the fourth son of this generation, they were all, I think, very gifted people. The fourth son is particularly heralded and was particularly gifted. My namesake, William Murray, he became, in his own right, the Earl of Mansfield. So whilst his brother was Viscount Stormont still, and he was the sixth Viscount at that point, his brother was so successful.
The younger brother outranked his older brother at that point.
Oh, well, by the end of his career, most definitely. So how did they do that? First of all, remarkable story. So born in 1705, right at the peak of the heart of Jacobite times, into a very, very overtly Jacobite family. Indeed, was it James Loveday or John Loveday came to visit here in 1732, and was astonished to see that we were displaying pictures of the Jacobite kings on our walls publicly.
Oh wow!
At that point,
Yes.
I know that's like putting a target on your chest. Like, shoot here, right here, come and get us. Yeah, so he was born into that, and the time when we could do very, very little for so many children. We basically could only put the heir in costume. You see what I mean? So little William was made to walk from here to London age 12.
Wow.
And arrived at Westminster School, where we knew the dean, one of our few connections in London. The dean of Westminster School was a Jacobite on the choir. And we were like, could you just look out for this one? Maybe squeeze him in at the back of the classroom. And he had to scrub the floorboards to get by and pay for his tuition. Fortunately, he then befriended the son of Baron Foley and was seen as, because he was incredibly intelligent, he was seen as a very good influence academically on him. So Baron Foley saddled up and paid for his entire schooling and also his time at Christ Church, Oxford.
Okay.
And that's where he really began to make a name for himself. He was an incredibly articulate and analytical individual. And having dabbled with politics, it was very clear he just wouldn't get anywhere as a Scot and as a supposed Jacobite. So he went into the law and was extremely successful there after a hard start. Extremely successful.
He was known as the best public speaker in England at the time.
Yeah,
wasn't he?
yeah. But he wasn't that bombastic Boris Johnson type. That was Pitt the Elder, his great rival. He was a much more sort of articulate, calm, analytical. He was the one that was rolled out when the Commons were all going, and it was doing that. He was the one that was brought in just to calm everyone down and to break down an argument very clearly and succinctly. And it's documented that, you know, having done this, everyone's like, and he would say, do his thing. There was literally like a tumbleweed situation where everyone would be like, yeah, what he said. Next topic. Moving on.
He sounds great.
And he becomes.
If you got it helpful right now.
He becomes the first Earl of Mansfield.
Yeah. So he became the Lord Chief Justice.
Okay.
Served as Lord Chief Justice for 35 years, which is a record which now cannot be broken. Longest serving in British history. He was thought to be the second most powerful man in the British Empire, second to the King. He was asked to form a cabinet twice, but said no twice because it would put too much power in any one person's hands. His major sort of legacy is in the reform of English law as opposed to Scots law, where essentially he took what was a very medieval and very complex legal system. He codified it, Romanized it, made it much easier to administer. Interestingly, at a time when the British Empire was obviously growing rapidly and many of the colonies were taking on a lot of British legal systems. And so a huge number of the colonies adopted his reforms, including some colonies that got away. So his name is actually mentioned roughly about 24 times a year on average in Congress America.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is really astonishing.
That's really
because
interesting.
he also basically started the American War of Independence.
Well, yeah, so this is what's interesting. And he was also a sort of an early abolitionist.
Yeah, so he was remarkably liberal.
And I want to talk about this
Probably
because there's
if you keep scrubbing.
well, yeah, but also, you know, linking in with the broader context of the Historic Houses Collections Award, one of the most famous pieces of your collection is the double portrait of Dido Bell and Lady
Elizabeth
Murray.
Yeah.
My personal what is that portrait and why does it apply to the first Earl? How does it apply to the first Earl?
Yeah, so it is a wonderful portrait. Now we know as having been done by David Martin, who painted basically everyone in the family, but previously thought had been done by Zoffany. So it depicts a white Lady Elizabeth Murray and a mulatto, black Dido Elizabeth Bell, clearly as equals, which is the first astonishing piece of it.
What date are we talking?
1770.
1770.
Yeah, 1770. Remarkably, both those girls are the equivalent of my first cousins. So they're both great nieces of the first Earl. And he adopted both of them into his household. I would love to have been part of those conversations. So you can imagine the father of Elizabeth, who was Viscount Stormont, who was an ambassador in Paris. Sadly, his wife, Elizabeth's mother, died as a result of a second childbirth.
Whilst he was then stationed abroad, she was adopted by her
great uncle. Yeah, and so obviously he came along and said, would you adopt this? And the first Earl, who had no children, and his wife, I think, were delighted. He said yes. John Lindsay, whose mother was a Murray, did exactly the same thing. We don't know when he mentioned the fact that Dido was mulatto, and I reckon the initial reaction from the first would have been, "Are you kidding me?"
So he had an illegitimate child with a
black slave woman. That John Lindsay, who was a captain in the British Navy, liberated from a Spanish vessel that he captured. And so, he went to his uncle because obviously he continued fighting in the Caribbean and elsewhere, so he couldn't look after his daughter.
And asked if his uncle, the Earl of Mansfield,
would also adopt her. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And that would have been extraordinary. Well,
extraordinary for anyone.
Yeah.
But even more extraordinary for a judge in the King's Court.
Yeah.
Like you're going to imagine, like a deeply respected individual had to keep.
But what an extraordinary person to set a trend in terms of changing the narratives socially. If the second most powerful man in England,
and we know that it caused consternation. We know that there's documented evidence of people coming for dinner and saying that.
And now what I'm interested in is they were brought up at his house, which was Kenwood.
Kenwood, yes.
And is that a house he purchased then?
Yes, this is a kind of Scottish mafia in London. So he purchased it off the Lord North. Is that right? I can't remember now. But obviously Robert Adam,
he brought Robert Adam in to transform it.
Exactly. And it was his, at that point, outside of London. The portrait actually has a wonderful...
It was like when we've talked in the past about the likes of Chiswick House or Zion Park. Exactly. It was a weekend villa if you had your townhouse in London, but your country seat was too far away to go for a weekend. You'd have almost...
So it was at the north end of Hampstead Heath. Yeah. Previously, and you can see it in the portrait, there's farm fields in between the two, because in the distance you can see St Paul's Cathedral silhouetted against the skyline.
The Dido Bell film that lots of listeners I'm sure have seen is at Kenwood, so people will know what it looks like. Before we move on completely away from that narrative, I just want to add, wasn't he, the reason it was so controversial that he had a black, as it were, daughter was because Britain at the time was central to the slave trade, which he was basically at the vanguard of beginning to wind down, wasn't he?
Yeah. So this is what makes the story would be remarkable even without this. This is what makes it truly exceptional.
Yeah.
So as Dido was growing up in his household as a cherished member of the family, there were some sort of social structures which some people dig into quite a lot. Some of them actually were probably led more by her illegitimacy rather than the colour of her skin.
Yes.
For instance, there were two aunts who were the generation in between the two, who were her sort of governess and mentors. They were also excluded from some things because they weren't married. So it is interesting. Yeah, okay. But she, for instance, her annual allowance was 4 or 5 times that of the head of the household. Yeah. So she was doing great. The head of the household was doing good. By sort of 18th century standards. But what makes the story really exceptional is there are a series of court cases throughout the second half of the 18th century, in particular the Somerset case in 1772, and then a really grisly case called the Zong case, Zong, Z-H-O-N-G, which is a merchant vessel, a slaver. That was in 1780. Essentially, the First Earl's judgments in those two cases led massive credence and momentum to the abolitionist movement. He essentially, in the Somerset case, began the abolition of slavery within England itself. So about 10,000 people overnight gained rights they didn't have as a result of that. Although the heavens may fall, the heavens being that's the famous quote, the heavens being the slave trade. And this did not make him a popular man.
Let justice be done, though the heavens may fall.
Indeed. And obviously a lot of his friends were not happy about this because they were heavily invested in it. So he could have backed off, but he didn't. He got in a 1-2. So in the Zong case of 1780, a really horrific, grisly case, essentially when the merchants murdered 300 slaves by throwing them overboard because they thought they could claim more on insurance should their cargo go missing. So horrific. But the First Earl sided with the insurers. I don't think the insurers, frankly, excuse my French, gave a crap that the humans had been killed. They were being ripped off by the merchants, so they wanted to go after them. But the First Earl made it very clear, siding with the insurers, that was because you could not treat humans as cargo. And so that then added massive weight to Wilberforce and Crowd later, who finished the job.
So he was a really epic guy, basically.
Massive shoes to fill.
And he as far as I understand it, was the person who replenished your family's fortunes after endlessly siding with the Jacobites, made all the money. So what happened? I mean, that's when we begin to get into the sort of territory we're sort of sitting in now.
Indeed,
so what happened next?
So he had a nephew who was the father of Elizabeth from the painting, who was we had that double
who
balance.
had the older title, which was the
Viscount Stormont. So he was the son of the first Earl's older brother. Because the first Earl and his wife had no children, the first Earl's title eventually passed back into the older brother's line.
So it's a special remainder that meant it could go upwards as well as down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although this speaks to, just to cover this off, but it speaks to quite how respected the first Earl was.
Yeah. Very few people were given that sort of remainder in there.
Well, yeah, indeed. But we were actually not the Earls of Mansfield. Shocker. We are the Earls of Mansfield and Mansfield, which is unique in the British peerage. And that is quite literally because the Earl of Mansfield, first one, went along to his former tutee, George III, and said, all right, Georgie, listen up. Because there's some discrimination against Scottish peers, I want, and my title therefore might not pass to my chosen heirs, I want you to create my nephew. Actually, wait, he's also a Scottish peer. Not my nephew, my nephew's daughter, someone who's not related to me by blood, wife, not related to me in blood at all. I want you to make her the Countess of Mansfield in her own right.
So you've actually got two earldoms, but they're both Mansfield.
Yes. That meant that the eventual heir, the great nephew, became the second and third Earl of Mansfield and Mansfield, inheriting one from his mum and one from his great uncle.
So is your father still a double Earl?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So he really should sign the visitors book, Mansfield and Mansfield.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
But that speaks to, we had gone from outcast Jacobites to being at the heart of Hanoverian power.
Obviously, it went to the niece, but it can't still go through the female line. That was just one
Well, I'm actually intrigued by that. So I want to dig into that a bit more.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But essentially, first Earl, hugely respected and amassed this great fortune.
And then because it went back to his brother's family, then you suddenly had Kenwood and Scone both being within the same family.
But in the meantime, the nephew, the one who's Viscount Stormont, whose wife became the Countess of Mansfield in her own right, we had this double bounce. He was also exceptionally gifted. But his way of getting out from underneath our Jacobite stain was to be a diplomat. And to work for the Hanoverians directly.
And it was under him that most of the impressive parts of the collection today were amassed.
He was the first, I'd say, proper collector. The first Earl was deep in the books, deep in the library. He did have an exceptional library, sadly burnt down by the Gordon rioters, and obviously had a few nice things, but it was really the second Earl, third Earl, and fourth Earl who were the collectors.
I always assumed that the library at Kenwood was his.
Yeah, in majority, unfortunately, the best things, and a lot of it was kept, and then actually sold off by later generations.
Does he commission Adam to do all that stuff at Kenwood?
First Earl, yes.
It is amazing.
It's a beautiful house.
Yeah, it is a fantastic house.
So it was the second Earl, well, actually the third Earl, second and third Earl, who became the ambassador abroad.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
And can we talk about where he was placed and just some of the key things? For example, you have Marie Antoinette's desk in your collection.
Yes.
That's from
Reasoner.
Him when he was a ambassador.
So he was the second bounce. He was the best diplomat of his generation. He was everywhere you needed to be to prove that. So in Prussia, then Vienna, and then in Paris, obviously the big one. Oddly, despite the fact that tensions with France were really beginning to peak, and it was just before the American Wars of Independence, he was strangely popular in the French court.
And his wife was very pally with Marie Antoinette.
Yes, and so he was known as Le Bel Anglais, which is not so bad for the British ambassador, although he was a Scot, we'll forgive that, and began to do some collecting when he was there. And
namely the porcelain.
But also developed his own reputation and fortune as a result of this. So combination of the first Earl and the second Earl meant that by the time we got to the third Earl, the one who was responsible for this, and who was one who hired William Axon.
You suddenly had quite a modest house, but quite an extraordinary contents.
Yes, indeed. Well, and we had the money to do something with it. Whereas previously we simply couldn't. So we were saved, as I said, two saviors.
So by the time these fortunes have been amassed and all these incredible items, the style has begun to change. When the presumably very late, early 19th century. But
it's the period, I suppose, of the Regency Gothic, when we see the likes of Strawberry Hill and others down in England, and the third Earl brings in William Atkinson, the architect, to rebuild this house in 1808.
1800.
1800.
So his first big gig.
Okay.
So that's big. We're
What's
true
William
Scots.
What's
We
William
bring people in
Atkinson
the
known
cheap.
for apart from Scone?
Strawberry Hill.
Strawberry Hill.
Yeah, that's the main one.
So listeners won't be able. So for those who are watching on YouTube, you can see that we're in what looks like a very classical room. It's a very lovely room. But what you won't be able to see is that because the light shining in from the window, it's actually a pointed gothic window. And on the outside, we're basically in a sort of the lower story of what looks like a giant fort. Basically, it doesn't look classical at all. So
it's quite an austere neo-Gothic for the Regency Gothic, which tends to be quite delicate and what's quite unusual. We've talked about Victorian Gothic with Ralph Wade, which was quite heavy, darker inside and out.
Yeah.
Regency Gothic was, as you mentioned, it felt very much like a Robert Adams sort of Regency rooms inside,
it was
except
Gothic
with the pointed arches. And what's interesting here is you almost see a combination of the two, because the interiors feel very Regency, except with the nods to the Gothic in the pointed windows, but the outside looks very more Victorian Gothic in its sort of austerity. And so basically the floor plan is still similar to that pre-19th century house, but the whole house is basically clad in, or the entire house was redone, but basically clad in sandstone, and turned into a
pink
castle, basically. What were some of the big changes or additions that were made to the house then?
So as you said, the footprint is basically the same. Some changes. It was, as I said, Atkinson's first big gig, and there were some issues around that. The third Earl, who obviously commissioned him, was busily trying to undermine governments in London and took his eye off the ball. And Atkinson got a bit carried away.
So he sort of came back and found
the place in pieces when it wasn't meant to be in pieces. So essentially, I think Plan 1 was stopped, and Plan 2 was, so they kept on Atkinson, but Plan 2 was launched, and that's what led to what we see now.
Okay.
So the initial mission was to try to preserve and enhance the historic and sort of antique elements of the great sort of history that we have here at Scone. I think Atkinson essentially destroyed much of that.
You know what?
And then had to recreate it in this neo-Gothic kind of shell.
It's funny. I can empathise a little bit with poor Atkinson, because I think about on Saturday I was shaping the box ball in my garden. And I have this wonderful Buxus ball in one of my beds, and it needed trimming. But obviously, every time I tried to trim it into a neater ball, I realized there were chunks missing, and so it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually there's practically just a little stump left, because to try and keep the shape, I kept getting it wrong.
I can't believe I'm saying this on this podcast, but you must learn. You have to be very careful when you're trimming your bush. Sorry,
it's true. No, it's great. I walked into that one. I know, but you do. It's funny when you start making changes to something. If you're not careful, you can end up pulling it apart completely.
That's really interesting, because I've often been architecturally quite confused by Scone, because I know it's very early, sort of strawberry Gothic. Really, as you say, Geoff, it doesn't actually feel like that. And I hadn't appreciated that it's. I mean, what you've said makes perfect sense. That he was brought in to do this slightly kind of antiquarian thing, smaller scale, but sort of went a bit mad, and that's why this is what it is. I mean, it's incredibly impressive.
We have the letter still from the clerk, essentially the estate manager at the time, writing to the third Earl saying, I've got to tell you, Atkinson's kind of gone overboard, so I've actually stopped all work. So all work was stopped for over a year, and nothing happened. As they kind of went, oh my God, what happened? And then obviously, brought it all back. And that's partly why in a hall, for instance, you have these sort of slightly gargoyle-y images, or sort of that come out of the wall, like gargoyles, images of abbots, of queens, of kings, and that's evoking this greater history that we have here at Scone, which was lost when the old building was demolished.
Could you just sort of give us a very quick sort of trot through the staterooms and what you would expect if you came in through the main entrance, just so listeners can have a sense of the floor plan?
Sure. And we were talking about this earlier. There's a rather strange thing where Scone is built on a slight slope. So meaning there are 3 stories, but weirdly the front door, the main, very clearly the main door, is on the first floor.
So the front facade looks like it's only 2 stories high.
Yes.
And then as the ground drops away, you see 3 stories on the south.
So we're now in the sort of submerged.
We're on the back.
We're the ground
floor, much
or the
prettier,
basement.
grander. Yeah.
Yeah, which is slightly strange. But you go through the big grand front doors into a rather uninspiring hall, which is we've always thought slightly strange. It's quite small, and so there's not really much to it.
And then into a little octagonal.
Yeah, and then quickly leads into what is quite, I think, a nice and very airy and very light, because it goes straight up through to the sky, octagonal shaped room called the octagon. It evokes in every monastic setting, there's an octagonal shaped room or space where the baptismal font would have been or is. As that speaks to that greater
chapter house.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It speaks to that, essentially, the monastic history that we have here. If you weren't going to go straight there, you turn left, you go into the dining room, previously the antechamber to the king's bedroom. So it used to be 2 rooms, now it's one big dining room. That's where Queen Victoria and co were entertained with great largesse, and the gold encrusted crown shaped shortbread. And
this was the third Earl who hosted her.
Yes.
So
actually, it was the 4th Earl, but yeah.
And so, just on a side note, we have to mention Queen Victoria because she stayed here for a night on her first proper state trip to Scotland.
State visit,
which is when she fell in love with Scotland and promptly built Balmoral.
Yeah.
And next week we'll be talking about one of the houses.
We will be doing a Scottish house. Well, exactly, that inspired the architecture. What was interesting with this trip here, so you were given 2 years' notice that she was going to come and stay for one night.
Yeah.
And in those
massive
2 years,
preparations.
It's like having you to stay, Geoff.
Well, I hope you build a new drive and a bridge for me before I come and stay.
And all the bushes will be...
Jeff's drive, Jeff's bridge.
I'm bringing an Italian pastry chef. And you put gas in and everything, didn't you?
Yeah, we basically pulled out all the stops.
For one night.
Spent a heinous amount of money, roughly 5 million.
Sometimes you need that to get stuff you'll have to do anyway done. I always think when I always get all the chores that I put off, you end up doing it all in one go.
I definitely need a royal visit to get my stuff in order.
Maybe, okay, so and then interestingly, she wasn't particularly enamored initially with the house, was she?
Yeah, she wasn't sort of like didn't give us a 5-star TripAdvisor review. She was a bit muted.
But she came back a few months later and tried to buy your house.
Yes.
She was jealous.
As she came to buy Scone.
They made inquiries. Having obviously
and you pointed her over the hill.
Yeah, and we thought we're a bit too close to the central belt, a bit too close to Perth. You should probably want something a bit more private, a bit more in the wilds, up in the Highlands, and we pointed her up the way. So it's gratifying to have had a role in the ongoing romance between the royal family and Scotland.
And so in the dining room you mentioned where the Queen tried all these wonderful pastries. That's where the ivory is.
That's where the ivory collection is.
Can we talk briefly? Can we touch on the ivory collection, because that's one of the important collections within the house?
Yes. So obviously massively embargoed now, very difficult even to restore. But where some people are
inshore probably,
all sorts
of things. It's just no one wants to touch it, do they?
Yeah, which is difficult, and some people obviously are upset by the idea of any ivory being on display. In any case, most of them are from the 17th and 18th century. Mostly 17th century from Central Europe, Switzerland, Austria, like Bavaria. I think of the poor artisans who spent their entire life pouring their sort of life and skills into making these things. I think it'd be a real disservice to them to just destroy them.
Yeah.
Obviously, if they're embargoed and everything else, that's all correctly sort of in place, then I think it's a good thing to still enjoy them. Central European, collected mostly by the 3rd Earl, some by the 4th Earl. Beautiful items.
Sculptures.
Most created, because they're quite large, 2 foot, 3 foot high. Mostly like bolted on, not from a single bit of ivory. One, obviously, that's very difficult, great skill. One is done from a single bit of ivory, and it's absolutely gorgeous.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you go through the dining room, and this is what I find interesting is your collection is slightly sort of is sort of siloed into different rooms in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you've got the ivory in the dining room, and then you go through into
there's a little anteroom, and then you're into the drawing room. State drawing room. Yeah.
And that is a current work in progress for you, isn't it?
Yes. So we hope to open. Well, we're open all year round, basically now, but we hope by April to have reopened that with the silks that are hung there restored, actually entirely renewed, and so the room will be returned to what it was in 1842 when Queen Victoria came to visit.
And I suppose, as a side note, just going through its recent history, the reason why that room, the silks were in such bad condition is because that room was basically flooded in the 1940s.
Yes, exactly.
Because there was a fire upstairs.
Yes, we had a school for refugee girls. So, Second World War, nearly all big houses were requisitioned in some way, shape, or form. The best you could hope for was a school for girls. So we landed that. We thought brilliant. We landed that, brilliant. Not the army, not boys, girls. Okay, we can live with that.
Until we decided to toast some marshmallows.
Yes, until there was a little marshmallow bonfire, which got out of hand, very out of hand, and there was a very significant fire.
And what was unusual, because it was a school for girls and therefore not a hospital, the collection was still all here in the house. Everything was here.
Yeah, so the girls were educated amongst the collection. And
so suddenly when this fire broke out, the girls were...
Yeah, everyone was helping.
Chucking everything out the window.
Yeah. So we have all the stories. So my favourite picture of the first star was put in the snow. There was snow outside. But,
wow.
And some of the paintings were slightly affected by it, but unfortunately not too badly.
We did an episode last week on the fire at Clarendon Park.
Oh yeah.
And I'll tell you, actually, I didn't mention this in that episode, actually, but I remember once when I was being shown it, because I was brought up not far from Clarendon, and I remember once when I was looking around, one of the lovely National Trust volunteers pointed out a dagger mounted on behind a painting in the dining room, and he said, "This dagger's here in case a fire ever breaks out, and we have to cut the canvas out of its frame to get it out the window." And bizarrely, that was the house where I saw this dagger behind the painting was the house that burnt down. I mean, extraordinary.
That is extraordinary.
But so much of the contents, most of the collection was saved.
Yeah, fortunately nothing was lost, but damage was done, heat damage, smoke damage.
And then water damage on these silks.
Yes, So then central heating
came in. So now can we just talk about its recent history as well, because it links with sort of the rest of the rooms. Your grandparents, great-grandfather took over in the 1940s.
Before that.
So it was his home before the requisitioning. Yeah. After the requisitioning, he comes back basically to a house that is semi in ruins.
Yeah, in a state of disrepair.
In a state of disrepair with fire damage and all the rest of it. And it never becomes a completely private family home again after that, does it?
Yeah, so he hadn't lived here for a long time. So he lived at a house across on the other side of the estate. So it was his first time with his family moving back into the palace after the Second World War. And the school, because the Girl Scouts who lingered on here for a bit afterwards. So he made the very bold decision to do that. With his wife to restore the house and then to open to the public as well.
And you must be one of the earliest houses, certainly in Scotland, to do that.
Yeah. So we will celebrate our 60th anniversary of house opening next year.
Okay. Wow.
Which is I actually now question, would we still be here if they hadn't made that decision? And I think that's I haven't yet come to a conclusion. But
I suppose the good thing with being early on doing that is you became well known for being an attraction long before other houses. You know, so many houses who've jumped on the bandwagon in the last 10, 15 years have struggled to get on the map at all.
Yes. Whereas, we're lucky that given the just immense history that is here at Scone,
and the royal history,
our family's interesting collection, but also the fact that we made that leap early, that definitely benefits.
So your grandparents really pioneered the idea of having a house, and also your father was brought up in the house.
Yes.
So then it was simultaneous, and you live in the house now, so it's simultaneously open to the public for hundreds of thousands of visitors a year, and simultaneously your family home. How have you found that transition from, I suppose, before you moved back here, you were living with your wife and your first son in London in a totally private house, and now suddenly you're back, but also you're brought up here when it was half open to the public. So how's that been, juggling the two? How do you find it?
So I was brought up just down the road when my grandparents were here.
Okay.
So obviously spent a lot of time here, but never lived here formally until actually the first lockdown.
Okay. Did you all come back for lockdown, you and your siblings?
At times, yes. Yeah. Then 2 years ago, returned to Scotland with screaming infant and my wife, who's from America. And from a very different kind of background. And here we are. What's it like? I give a lot of credit to my great-grandparents again for the way that, in particular, my great-grandmother designed the building and how she split out the sort of private side from what was then going to be the tourist side to then what was going to be catering and then the offices for the estate. you can be here, and as you can experience right now, you can be here in the private side and really have no idea that the rest of the palace is open to the public, which is a great relief.
But you're quite fortunate the way the house is laid out, with the main staircase not being in the centre of the staterooms.
Yes.
Means that you're able to amazingly go in the front door and tour the staterooms and leave, and yet you can keep basically the lower ground and the upstairs and access through by the main staircase separate.
Yes.
Which is quite an unusual layout for a house.
It is unusual.
It has enabled you to do that.
Yeah, and we'll see if it stays like that forever. We would like to make more of the palace available, but then it gets complicated.
Yeah.
One of the things I think that's super cool about this building is that long gallery you have.
Yeah,
that's really amazing.
That's very special.
I haven't come across that actually that often in similar houses of type. And you use it for weddings, don't you?
Yeah.
It's quite unusual, I suppose, in a Regency Gothic house to have a long gallery, isn't it?
And formerly the longest room in Scotland until they built a long one at Holyrood. But
okay,
we're all right being one up by the.
And there's the organ at the end. You know, it's funny mentioning that. I remember. People, the royals' families like to have things bigger and better than, wasn't it? I think it was Queen Victoria visited Trent Park once and saw how extraordinary it was and said it was far too grand for a commoner to live in or something. And then went off and expanded Buckingham Palace. Some story like that. It's funny.
They're just party poopers, aren't they?
Yeah. The funniest was I remember in my past job working for a foreign king, and I was talking to him. He called me the professor because I wore linen suits and looked like Monty Don. And he used to summon me to the deck of his boat to talk about things. And I remember telling him that Boris Johnson at the time had just commissioned a new royal yacht. And he asked how long it was going to be. And I said 130 metres. And his boat was 125 metres. And I just knew he was thinking he's got to commission a bigger boat. It's funny, isn't it? So, such big egos amongst some people. But for context, that plan to build a new royal yacht has now been scrapped. But actually, the old royal yacht, Britannia, is not far from here, is it?
Not too far.
We should do actually an episode of that, because that is a floating.
That is a great idea.
I was there a couple of years ago for the church, or with the Church Society.
Oh, fun!
That was really fun.
So it's really interesting, and I want to just touch now because we're sort of winding up. But I mean, it's an extraordinary history, an extraordinary collection in terms of. We've talked about some notable pieces.
Yeah.
I suppose if you were to sum up sort of within categories, you've got a great collection of portraiture.
Yeah.
Including the Didobel portrait. You've got the ivory. You've got some amazing artifacts from American and Scots. And then what are some of the other sort of highlights within the collection?
The desk.
The Marie Antoinette desk.
We're very lucky that we have a little sprinkling of everything.
Yeah.
So we have a wonderful clock collection actually,
and a wonderful ceramics. Clocks are exempt from inheritance tax because they're mechanical objects.
Yes, that is true.
Are they?
That is true.
And I know someone.
Although I'm not sure if it's clocks or watches.
No, it's clocks as well because
I might have to look at our books. And
a friend of mine in Devon has started buying up lots of very expensive antique clocks to leave to his son. He won't have to pay inheritance tax on them.
Let's just say there isn't a crash in the clock market.
Yeah, exactly. It's so funny. Anyway,
we have lovely clocks, a lot of French ones, and then a collection of ceramics, which previously I had no interest in at all when I was younger. You just run past them and wonder why our library had no books in it. It just had lots of pots and pans. But now I have an increasing appreciation for them, in particular one or two pieces of the collection, in particular the Stormont Sèvres, which was designed by Viscountess Stormont, the one that became the Countess of Mansfield in her own right, the wife of the ambassador in Paris. She did it in conjunction with, in collaboration with her best friend Marie Antoinette.
That's very cool.
Which makes that very special.
You don't eat off that porcelain anymore.
No, we don't. Although, so this is the day, the days before Netflix, before the mobile phones. What else do you do on a Friday afternoon? We go and design some Sèvres with the French.
I love it.
So that's very special. And then the one that we haven't touched on, which I sort of probably stands in a category of its own, is the Vernet Martin collection.
That's the stuff that was split with the Tsar.
Exactly.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about
the
that just in a nutshell.
So, we'll crack in a nutshell. The Vernon Martin, so the Martin brothers, or four of them, they're incredibly gifted, really chemists in a way. They were initially commissioned by the French government to design a material that could transport ammunition as fast as possible, but in a durable material as possible. So the carriages that were very light, that can move quickly and not break. By doing this, they created something that was very shiny and that was very easy to manipulate and that would look great on cabinets. So that's what they really specialized in, was cabinets. They did make, however, a small collection of vases, which are really very special. Initially, that was done for the Palace of Versailles. Obviously, with the French revolutions, the French government seized them and they were sold off with lots of the other things from Versailles. In stepped a young fourth Earl who was at the university in Paris. Alongside his friend, he went to his coronation, actually, the young Tsar of Russia. Because we're smarter than the Tsars of Russia, they split the 120, 70 to us, 50 to the Tsar. which
is just as well, because the 50 went to the Tsar have disappeared.
Yeah, disparu. So during the Russian Revolution, they were in the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. Sadly, they disappeared, meaning that our collection is entirely unique.
Wow, that's
and they are incredible things made of papier-mâché.
Are they really?
Yes, and that's what makes it so extraordinary, because papier-mâché shelf life.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, and the shelf life in papier-mâché is not normally 250 years old.
Wow. Okay.
Which means I'm nervous every moment I look at them. They're going to crumble at any moment.
Wow.
But they're very, very special.
Children's artwork in a new light.
Yeah.
And just as we close, because this episode will come out after the event, but as we came down the drive that was built for Queen Victoria,
indeed,
we saw all sorts of horse jumps and stuff. And can you just tell us, because this is another exciting string to your bow?
Yes, indeed.
Is the premier horse trials in Scotland, indeed, as of this year, are now to be held at Scone.
So the Scone Palace International Horse Trials, remarkably an event which is of the same quality as the Olympics, which is astonishing. So a very, very significant event, a new string trial bow, as you put it. I think it really speaks to where historic houses are at nowadays, which is you have to work it hard.
Yeah.
In order to still be here, generate a profit, reinvest that in the fabric of the building, and we have to do things like this. And so this is an additional way for us to generate revenue, and also service and put on an event for a really wonderful community, which is the equestrian community.
So as of next Monday, the estate will be humming with people from all over the world and horses from all over the world.
Yes. People we're quite used to. Horses we're used to because we also run Perth Racecourse, but there's normally about 100 max at Perth Racecourse.
Yeah.
It'll be close to 2,000 horses coming through the place throughout the next week.
Rory took us very kindly through a brilliant episode a few weeks ago on country house festivals, which included Badminton Horse Trials, which we talked about, which is probably the most well-known of the English horse trials. And we talked about exactly that, how different estates have chosen to commercialise in different ways. We did Goodwood and
of course,
all sorts. So it was great. So that's very exciting. Well, all the best for that.
Thank you very much.
Very well.
Thank you,
William. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
I think it's a remarkable place, and it's really lovely to be here.
I didn't know half that history. It's absolutely fascinating, and you told us in a very easy to understand way. So thank you.
I hope so. It can get quite complicated, and I can bore on as well.
No, not at all. No, it was great. It was fantastic.
In fact, I sit here and actually I realise we're all Scots. Well, certainly I'm more Scots than I am. Hilarious. My mother's fully Scottish, whereas my father, as an Englishman, has got a bit of German, a bit of French.
No, my mum's English.
Oh, there you go. We're all part Scottish. Or some roots in Scotland, have we not?
Do you wear the kilt?
I have a kilt.
You have a kilt, but you don't wear it.
I have one. Yeah, I don't wear it.
To our actually Scottish listeners, do apologise.
Yeah, sorry. But none of us sound Scottish.
We don't.
But thank you, William, for joining us. Wishing you all the very best for your for the judging of the Historic Houses Collections Award.
Thank you.
I will see you again. We will see you again at the awards, I suppose.
I hope so.
If you're able to come down. And in the meantime, all the very best for the next few months.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you to our lovely listeners for joining us. Please join us again soon. Bye bye.
Bye bye.